Hello, welcome to the Ponderings podcast. I'm your host, Milo. This podcast, I talk about philosophy, cognitive science, sometimes about space things and psychology, but mostly just things that I'm currently interested in and that I'm currently reading, and then I sort of use this platform as a way to teach what I've been learning, and that way I'm also teaching myself the things that I've been reading, making them more digestible for myself and also for the people, for you guys that are listening. So this podcast can be found on any podcast hosting site like Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and I also post this podcast on the Ponderings YouTube channel, or each episode is posted on there every Monday. But yeah, so in this episode 19, I will be comparing James Hillman's soul and his soul-making process concept to Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy of organism, specifically the aspects that deal with eternal objects and subjective unity of experience, things like that. So we're sort of comparing Hillman's archetype and the imaginary realm to Whitehead's these aspects in his philosophy that can also be akin to that sort of imaginative realm. And I think that Hillman's psychology would fit really well in Whitehead's metaphysical scheme. And I know that Hillman has quoted Whitehead before as well in his books. But yeah, I don't know. I just think comparing the two can bring about a lot of insight into each of their ways of thinking or the philosophies behind their work. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm interested in right now. But yeah, so I wanted to share this quote of Hillman in his Revisioning Psychology, just to sort of start out with a definition for soul. So, quote, "By soul, I mean the imaginative possibility in our natures, the experiencing through reflective speculation, dream, image, and fantasy, that mode which recognizes all realities as primarily symbolic or metaphorical, that unknown component which makes meaning possible, turns events into experiences, is communicated in love, has religious concern, deriving from its relation with death." So, with this quote, I kind of wanted to base off this episode, sort of breaking down this quote, because there's a lot to unpack here, such as like the mode which recognizes all realities as primarily symbolic, the turning events into experiences. These phrases mentioned, I want to expound upon them and then compare it to Whitehead's philosophy and how Whitehead's philosophy can help deepen an understanding of this imaginal realm and how it impacts actual events, actual experiences, not only impact but creates and brings forth. So I wanted to start out with the phrase, the imaginative possibility in our natures. So first off, I'm going to talk about Whitehead and then sort of explain the concepts of Whitehead, potential versus actual, apprehensions, eternal objects, concrescence, and we're just sort of going to use these terms to give an illustration to what Hillman is talking about. So first, potential versus actual in Whitehead. So Whitehead sees everything as events. So there's no things in themselves or things out there or separated objects or substances. There's no substances. There's only process. So everything is a process. And every being is in the process of becoming that being continuously. So the best way to think about it is how he terms it as events. There's events which influence other events and so on and so forth. We can think of this like how atoms or molecules kind of come together to create chemical compounds. And if we go further, there's cells just on their own doing their thing. When they come together, there are different organ systems. So like the skin, there's the nervous system, there's muscle systems. And then all of that can come together to create a sort of centralized organism. An organism that is able to have all of these different systems work in conjunction to have a subjective unity of experience, even though there's so many different systems at play. There's a lot of multiplicity even in just like one organism. There's all of the events of my cells interacting with the environment, their specific environment. Then there's me as a whole organism interacting with the environment or other organisms, influencing them as they influence me. So there's a lot of, instead of having things looked at as if they were substances, we're trying to use the word event, an actual event, to describe all these, or to encompass all these processes that are going on. So then he goes further with apprehensions and concrescence to illustrate movement in these processes. So apprehension, well, first, again, let me go into potential versus actual, and then I'll get into the apprehensions of actual events and eternal objects. So potential versus actual. I have a quote here from Whitehead: "Actuality is the decision amid potentiality." And then the eternal objects are the pure potentials of the universe. The actual entities differ from each other in their realizations of potentials. When we're talking about Whitehead and his process philosophy, events, it's not a simple way. It's a more clear way of understanding his philosophy, but then when we're trying to define his terms, that's where it can get a little tricky or a little confusing. And sometimes for me, like, I have to sort of go over the definitions or sort of visualize again his philosophy as a whole to be able to understand these very specific terms that he's using to describe the movement between these different processes. Potentiality, we can think of it as things in history or things in our past. Thinking of an actual event, the human organism is made up of all of the different processes that are happening in that moment, but also all of the processes that have led up to that specific moment. So we can think of like aging, and all of those cells coming to life and dying, and the growth of a human baby to like a human teenager. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of different processes, and you don't just appear. You sort of emerge from, being a fetus, but even before that, before your parents even come together. So there's a lot of history that comes into play in Whitehead's metaphysics, his philosophy. So he sort of sees the universe as this ongoing creative advance. So we're continuing to expand. So you kind of have to look at the terms in relation to that concept of advancing forward, expanding. So here's another quote, and this one will sort of get into the apprehensions of past actual events and eternal objects. Each actual entity is a concrescence of feelings of the antecedent world, which do not only have objective content, but also subjective form. And as this concrescence is not only determined by the objective content, by what is felt, but also by the subjective form, by how it is felt. It is not only determined by the antecedent world that is felt, but also by how it is felt. In other words, each actual entity has to take into account its past, but that past only conditions and does not completely determine how the actual entity will take it into account. And how an actual entity becomes constitutes what that actual entity is. So this is from Process and Reality, Whitehead's magnum opus. But I kind of want to break this down. So each actual entity is a concrescence of feelings. What he means by concrescence, it's sort of a coming together of all these events. But it would be in relation to that organism or the surrounding related phenomena. But bringing it to just focus on the organism, the concrescence of feelings of the antecedent world. So bringing together of the past actual events that have sort of presupposed that entity. So yeah, the concrescence of feelings of the antecedent world. We're bringing together all these past experiences, past events, into the present actual entity, which will make up the past experiences and past events for the next actual entity that will emerge, and so on and so forth. And again, like how he says, each actual entity has to take into account its past, but that past only conditions and does not completely determine how the actual entity will take it into account, and how an actual entity becomes what constitutes what that actual entity is. So yes, the past and all of these things are going to bring forth the actual entity, but there is imaginative possibility and creativity which allows the agent, the organism, to decide on what it becomes. So it's not completely determined by the past, but more so, like it has some determinations from the past. Obviously, you are a human, you won't just suddenly turn into like an octopus or something, but you'll continue to grow and develop as a human and then eventually decay and die. And, be buried, hopefully be some sort of food for scavengers or something, or I don't know. I don't think our caskets allow for that. What the legacy we've left behind, whether it's children, grandchildren, or even just the people that we've encountered. So yeah, we leave an impression on everything around us. Even if it's not like a child, a grandchild, we still have an effect. Like for instance, with climate change happening, we can see how humanity influences events like weather systems or things like that. We have a very huge impact on our environment and how a lot of animals are endangered because of how we've destroyed habitats. That sort of illustrates this impression or leaving of a legacy. But it also doesn't even have to be so concrete or physical like that. It can be in the form of feelings, the way music affects your art or mythology, belief systems, thoughts, words. Words have their own life and history, sort of their own essence, their own... This is where Hillman's psychology plays a big part. He sees as everything animated or holding weight. There's a lot of history behind words. Words aren't just, they have their very strict definitions, like where did the root words come from? How did those languages develop? What do those words mean in the context of metaphors or idioms? How words came about, how written language has come about is through development and history. So things aren't just standalone, not even words are like just standalone what they are. They're always in reference to something. The turning events into experience would really apply to his philosophy. Both Hillman and Whitehead, they want to reach a depth of satisfaction or an intensifying of experience. And the concrescence is sort of having to do with intensifying experience, going deeper into what the organism is becoming and what its impact in the world is, and its own legacy, the things it encounters is more as it grows. So we can see concrescence as soul making, or as Hillman's soul making. And this soul making is again that sort of concrescence, that coming together of a bunch of differing but relevant, related things in their situated environment coming together to create something new. And that could just be an organism the next moment, me the next moment. That's something new from the me from before, but I use the me from before as a reference to continue being me, the me now. So like that's where the term subjective unity of experience, it keeps it sort of continuous. We don't completely forget our personality. We can't. It's embedded in like every part of us. It's embedded in our bones, our muscles, everything. They make room for plurality in experience. It's not just this individual soul, and we're trying to bring all these different components into one being. Hillman wants to acknowledge that these different components are valid. These different aspects of ourselves are valid. So he wants it to be sort of a polytheistic approach to our personalities, to our different aspects of who we are, even different aspects of a city, a country, of a relationship. There isn't just one personality, and you can't integrate it all into one without suppressing all of the others or repressing all of the others. He sort of acknowledges that there is a time and place for every single type of personality or emotion, feeling, aspect. And I'm probably rambling right now and not making any sense, but honestly, I feel like Whitehead and Hillman have that sort of same very poetic way of going into their philosophies, and sometimes the way to be able to understand them is to engage in that poetic or creative adventure of ideas. So that's usually how I spend my time. When I'm reading them, I'll start comparing them to other philosophers that I'm reading. Especially like Whitehead, I'll start comparing whatever I'm reading to Whitehead, or if it's relevant, like phenomenology or process of philosophy, then I'll sort of bring Whitehead into the picture, and sort of engage in dialogue with these ideas. And that sort of helps me get a deeper understanding of these ideas, even though they're very out there. And they seem kind of like, what the hell are they talking about? But that's the point, I think. Well, not the what the hell, but I think the point is that they really want to encourage this imaginative possibility, again, coming back to it all. And this adventure of ideas expands, because again, these ideas aren't coming from nowhere. They're coming from everywhere. Like, they're coming from whatever they've been exposed to, whatever, like, there's no original thought. That saying, there's no original thought, there's no original art. It's all stolen. Not really stolen, it's just we take it in and then we sort of bring it together to what the other things we already have in our arsenal. So, and that could be a good way to define concrescence. It's this taking in of new things, novel things, or they're not novel. what the novelty comes in that new creation when you put everything together. So, for instance, me, in this moment, I am novel, and the next me is going to take this present me, as well as all of the past of me, into another novel moment, and so on and so forth. The novelty comes together when a concrescence occurs. So when that coming together occurs of related events, of drops of experience coming together. And these drops of experience would also have to do with things like imagination, possibilities, potentials, eternal objects, which are myths, belief systems, philosophies, thoughts, images, the things that we are perceiving, the images that we sort of conjure up. Whitehead's philosophy isn't entirely idealistic, and it's not entirely physical or reductionistic. So any entity whose conceptual recognition does not involve a necessary reference to any definite actual entities of the temporal world, that's an internal object. It's also all the ways in which we describe this world, the adjectives. These are the eternal objects, the colors, shapes, feelings, smells, tastes, qualities, the images. In Hillman's psychology, he always says this phrase, stick to the image. When we're trying to describe our dreams, the experience of our dreams, or the experience of our just everyday experiences, use adjectives, use myths, but don't try to interpret this like hidden meaning behind these things. Notice the face of the dreams. There's a face appearing for the dreams. There's a face appearing in every encounter. Notice it, witness it, and describe it. Stick to the image. Describe the feelings, describe the shapes, colors, smells, tastes, qualities. And these would be eternal objects for Whitehead. Anima mundi to Whitehead is, quote, each actual entity is a throb of experience. Apart from the experiences of subjects, there is nothing, bare nothingness. So Whitehead also sees everything as experiencing. Every actual entity with throbs of experiences, of events that are drops of experience. And Hillman's anima mundi, the world soul, that's sort of what he means. He doesn't see it as that there's this one unifying soul. He sees it more as everything being animated, everything having throbs of experience, as being occasions of experience. And I've been quoting a lot this episode, but my outline was sort of scattered and kind of all over the place, mostly filled with quotes, just, I guess, maybe to express that imaginative possibility, that adventure of ideas. Hopefully you've been able to understand what I've been saying, or at least get an idea of how Hillman and Whitehead relate. But yeah, so let me end here with a quote from Hillman. Let us say that the astronomical bodies, the planets, offer metaphysical bodies, the gods, or one might say the archetypes, by means of whom every element of experience can be interpreted. What is beyond in both meanings are the heavenly bodies. These afford some nouns and adjectives, some processes, and some realities. The planetary persons fill the void of the beyond with the myths of their bodies, and the bodies of their myths. This cosmology is a psychological field, a field because metaphysics is placed in imaginal locations. Psychological because the planets are persons with traits, with behaviors, and in relation with one another. Before I close off here, Hillman really emphasizes personifying everything, and not in the mode of personification where we're projecting ourselves onto things, but giving the things around us like personality, because he acknowledges that humans are very symbolical, and the way we connect to the world around us, the way we make meaning, the way we create soul is through this exchange of symbols and interpretation through symbols and metaphors. And for Whitehead, he would refer to this as symbolic reference. He would say that symbolic reference is the interpretive element in human experience. Human experience, how we experience the world, is largely based on the point of view, our perception. Of course, there is phenomena, there are processes that are real. Our images are also real. The way we create myths, the way we create metaphors, these things influence how we feel and interact and engage with the world around us. So for Hillman, it's very important to take these images and myths, metaphors, dreams, this imaginative realm, to take it seriously. Even if it's very jumbled up at first, like this podcast episode. I hope this was helpful in some way. I get very excited about Whitehead, just overall. And Hillman has been my person for the past couple of weeks. Been really into his stuff. And then sort of applying it to Whitehead, or seeing how they compare and how they don't. But yeah, I hope this was interesting. I will probably have more episodes on Hillman, but please stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much if you stuck around till the end, if you understood any of what I said. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I'll see you next time.